we conduct stings with Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd and his team, there are actually two parts to the investigation. One part is where we go after men trying to exploit children. You know, you saw Santa Claus getting busted just last week. The other part of the investigation involves human trafficking.
So what we're talking about today is the second part. The first part is, we're all familiar with Chris Hansen's, child exploitation stings. In this case, we're dealing with the human trafficking, or what people are more familiar with is solicitation of prostitution.
And typically these stings yield dozens, a dozen, 2 dozen individuals who have, are alleged to have committed some type of a crime. In this case, as happens sometimes, a minor celebrity stepped into the scene, and this person is a well-known media influencer, and his name is Craig Long.
Craig Long, correct. And we usually see there's usually at least one person of some notoriety, a school teacher or a police officer, or it doesn't have to be major celebrity status. It just so happens that Mr. Long does have a significant social media following. You're going to see at some point Grady Judd showing a picture of Mr. Long with the president and the president's son. So
he's an outspoken law and order conservative, and therein lies the irony.
Correct. And that's why this particular sting has gone so viral.
Then there's Craig Long we arrested. He's 41. Some of you may recognize him. He's an influencer. He also owns Craig Long Fitness in Tampa. He was seeking the services of a prostitute.
Now, Matt, we all know if you live in Central Florida, Sheriff Judd is not a secret. We know he's out there. He does a lot of these press conferences. We're just beginning right here. But what do you think? Why does he do it? What's his why?
So the why is publicity, right? He's an elected official. He is, I think, without a doubt, viewed as kind of a deity in Polk County. I mean, he is loved by the Polk County citizens. He's tough on crime. He makes that obvious. I think there's two reasons why he does this. The first, and I don't know which one is a priority, but one is, to show the community that he takes these things seriously. I think it is for publicity. He is an elected official, keep the citizens in his back pocket from the standpoint of support. But the other side of it, and that's the side that I'm more okay with, because I do have issues with these kinds of press conferences from a citizen standpoint, right? A legal standpoint. But the other side of it is probably to, deterrence, right? There is an inherent value in deterring people from committing these crimes. And so while it's obvious that they take pleasure in arresting people for criminal acts and telling the world, hey, look at what we're doing, they want to deter crime. And if they get this out there, look, you come into our county and you do these types of things, you're going to get arrested, and we're going to blast you all over social media.
Okay, let's tune back in and listen to what this one's all about.
Did I tell you that he's married? That he's got 125 followers on Instagram, 568 followers on TikTok? Well, I'm going to give him some content for his social media today. He was a previous felon who straightened up, really what we want to see in life. Now he's an influencer. He moves in big circles, even with the president. This is a photograph with the president and his son not long ago. Now, we like to see people who make mistakes early in life, and he had a long history straighten up. We like the fact that he likes the cops. Heck, he liked them so much, he got caught up in a sting and got to be up and real close with the cops.
So I want to jump in here because what this is turning into, does rub me the wrong way, okay? It's one thing to be proactive in that manner I just mentioned, where you're trying to deter people from committing a crime. But I'm a defense attorney. I was a prosecutor for a very long time. From the prosecutorial view, right? From law enforcement's view, we want to stop crime, we want to prosecute crime, things like that. This is trouble because the head of the law enforcement agency for the Polk County Sheriff's Office. And it's not isolated to this press conference. Everybody, as you mentioned, knows Grady Judd does these press conferences on a regular basis. It can be argued by defense attorneys and anybody that there is an inherent bias against this individual. And in a more high-profile case than, say, a misdemeanor, which is what this allegation is, solicitation for prostitution, it's a misdemeanor of the first degree. But in a higher-profile case, which he does these regularly for, one could argue that you're poisoning the jury pool or you're creating issues.
Yeah, that went through my head. I mean, something like this, WFLA is a large station in Central Florida. It's probably debatable how many people watch local news now versus 20 years ago, but there's still a lot of eyeballs on this. Is that a compelling argument? Would you go to, file a motion to change the venue, saying it can't get a fair trial in Polk County because the jury pool has been tainted with these, his rendition of the facts?
In this case, probably not. That's going to be tough to say that, but it's not just, I think you said WFLA. It goes beyond that, because I think, and I could be mistaken here, that they post these on TikTok and Facebook. And so they are utilizing the tools that people, citizens, the youth use these days to digest news, quick bits of information, YouTube, Facebook,
So you go on TikTok, you see Sheriff.
Probably. Oh, yeah, there's not a doubt in my mind. And if he's not posting it, or his agency or his PR person isn't posting it, someone's clipping it and showing the video. In fact, I think there's another video associated with this one, because this sting involved Chris Hansen, where there's another influencer using Grady Judd's press conference right here to comment on it. So these things go viral. And, of course, when you're filing a motion like that to change venue, it's because the jury pool in that county is poisoned. Now, in a much more high-profile case, an armed robbery, a homicide, something like that, that argument becomes much more compelling to a judge, because...
Right. And this isn't O.J. Simpson in Los Angeles. This is an influencer.
Sure.
A guy who's got a podcast in a gym.
Yeah.
The sheriff just told us.
And you're going to hear him quote how many viewers he has, and I think the sheriff mistakenly quotes digits in the hundreds when it's the thousands, right? It's 550,000 followers, which is a lot. But there's a fine line here in doing a press conference for deterrence and then doing a press conference to mock somebody. And, I don't think it's necessarily proper for the head of Polk County Sheriff's Office to be mocking somebody.
Okay, let's continue for a minute and then think about, as a former prosecutor, what is going through your head. Are you here at this press conference, or are you watching it, at home and wondering, what's this going to do to my case?
We asked what his attitude was. They said, he had a great attitude. He appreciates law enforcement. Well, there you go. You got arrested in the human trafficking sting. Influence that for a while.
I mean, it's hard not to chuckle, right? Because he's being witty. He's being, in a way mocking, right, the situation. From a prosecutor standpoint, no matter how much you want to deny this, when the sheriff is making a presentation like this, it is indicating to you that the sheriff wants to see a certain kind of result in any case. And the prosecutor has really, really broad power. They bring the charges, they prosecute them, they negotiate pleas, they take cases to trial. And it's hard to say that you are not biased by any outside influences, that you as a barred Florida attorney are digesting every case fairly, assessing them fairly, making fair offers, trying to work through a case fairly when presented with something like this, because it is the sheriff's agency that is making this arrest. It is the sheriff's agency that would be testifying as witnesses. Mm-hmm. And so I find it difficult to believe that the prosecutor is not going to some extent take into account that background noise, right? And completely block it out as a unbiased, fair prosecutor, right? And it's an important job. I did it. It's not easy. There's a lot of work involved. But, when...
Does this make the job harder, though?
I think it can. I don't know in this particular case that it will, right? This got publicity. It'll have its 30 minutes of press, and people are going to forget about it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a prostitution.
Yeah, I don't believe there may be some news people that want to kind of, journalists that want to, show up to court and see what happens. But the reality is he's probably going to hire an attorney. They're going to waive his appearance, except for maybe entering a plea. And in these cases, Polk County has a pretty hard line on them. So there is only so far they'll go, absent other legal issues like entrapment or, not actually completing the crime of solicitation. And I don't know that that applies to this particular case, but there are cases where the conversations are very, nuanced in a way where, they're dancing around the subject matter, right? Something quick, $100. I think, a reasonable person's going to say, we know what you're talking about there. But, I do think that this can make it more difficult. And I think that there's a way to approach these press conferences to get the clicks, to get the views, to get the message out. Don't do this in our state, in our county. It's not okay. We are going to prosecute you, without the creating a spectacle or mocking, the individual.
And so you focus your career on criminal defense now. Is there any civil liability that you've ever seen in terms of you have sheriffs like this getting on air and sort of maligning someone's their reputation, their character before they've even had their day in court? Is there any sort of do people sue the departments?
Absolutely. Now, whether there's actual liability or not is a different discussion, but you are 100% opening yourself up to civil lawsuits because, there's the whole innocent until proven guilty. Journalists, it is drilled into them from day one, and I'm not a journalist, but we know this. You hear in the news or print media, alleged or allegedly accused.
And this sounds like you're guilty.
Yeah, Sheriff Judd is not saying that. He's saying this man did this. This man solicited prostitution. Now, I'm not an expert in defamation or slander or libel, and I know that the ultimate defense to those accusations is the truth. So, he has access to the evidence at this point, right? If he is certain, absolutely, that this individual committed this crime, he can toe that line and not say accused or allegedly. And if that is the case, I don't know that there will be any viable civil action. But when you say those things, you can't undo that.
All right.
And so whether it's a press conference like this with Sheriff Judd or in other counties when there's a high profile case and the state attorney's office does a press conference, those things can become problematic both in prosecuting that case because the defense attorney is latching onto that for some type of bias or suppression, or, in a more serious case than this, maybe change of jurisdiction, which is a nightmare for the state of Florida, because that means that an entire separate jurisdiction has to use their manpower or woman power and resources to prosecute a crime that should have been prosecuted in Polk.
Right, and given the nature of this crime, maybe a neighboring county doesn't focus that much on prostitution as their,
Yeah, and then again, you're dragging the law enforcement officers from Polk County over to another county. It's a waste of resources for something that can be avoided.
All right, let's see if we can dig out the video of the actual arrest.
Was somebody posing as a prostitute who was actually working for Grady Judd's sheriff's office. He agreed to pay $100 for something quick meaning oral sex. Now, this is the part where we come in. Craig walks into the hotel
Hansen, by the
room
way,
with
who has a
wires
national
being
reputation for
placed,
going
starts
after
talking
and also
to
working with
the
Sheriff Judd.
sheriff's employee posing as the prostitute. Now, you're going to have to listen carefully, but you'll get the drift of what's going on. Take a look.
Where you coming from, the gym?
People all in the goddamn hidden. Where they at?
Oh my God.
Hid them in the closet.
Hidden in the open the closet.
So right away, and I've seen a lot of these undercover videos throughout my career, you can tell that he is on edge, right? He's where they at. I think he...
Referring to the police?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's pretty clear that yes. And I think he knows that there is a chance here that this is some type of undercover sting. And why on earth you would kind of put yourself in this situation when you're having those doubts as you're walking into the room. I can't put myself in his shoes, but it's very clear that as he walks into the room, he thinks that there's something more to this than just, paying for two consenting adults to engage in
Right. And there's a
sexual
certain irony as well. We know that he was an outspoken commentator and a fan of Sheriff Judd.
Correct.
So he knows that, hey, if you're in Polk County, don't mess around. Sheriff Judd's going to get you. And isn't he driving right now to Polk County to meet with this person allegedly for, illicit purposes?
Correct. He's being accused of driving from Tampa to Polk County to engage in, soliciting a prostitute for sex.
Dan, your nervous ass.
So here he is checking the closet right now. The reality is usually when they do these
You're
things,
behind this, so go ahead and lock it yourself.
usually when they do these things is they are in an adjoining room or a room next door. And so they come in the front door or a side door to once there's some type of signal preset, either a word or an action. And you're going to see that here shortly. I believe in this case that action was when she said, I'm going to go get a towel. And we'll see that in a minute.
Well, you gotta do something. Let me know you're not police.
So you said you got to do something quick, right?
Now you said, I just want to make sure you're not police. Do something to show me that you're not police. Now, there's this misconception that the police have to tell you they're police. They do
And if
not.
they tell you that they're not police,
There's just like in an interview, right? If you're accused of a crime, a murder or anything, and they want to sit down with you in custody or not, they can lie. They can tell you they've got DNA or surveillance. So the fact that he says, tell me you're not police, that's not a real.
so that's not a golden ticket out of an entrapment charge.
No, entrapment is a very specific defense where, but for law enforcement's activity, you wouldn't have committed the crime. So essentially, the easiest example you can give is if a police officer undercover walked up to you on the street and said, hey, do you want this cocaine? And hand you that cocaine and you say, yeah, sure. And they say that's $10 and you give them $10. That would be entrapment because but for their activity, there's no evidence to show that you would have otherwise committed the crime.
But a police officer placing an ad, say online, and saying,
Yeah, undercover, either being an underage minor or a prostitute, that's not entrapment. Now, if you're communicating with that person and you just innocently enough enjoy, role playing or having chats and you're chatting with somebody and that's it. And then all of a sudden the law enforcement officer says, hey, do you want to pay me $100 for sex? Now you're going to be getting into that. And again, this is a decision for a judge to make, but I think any defense attorney would tell you at that point that because law enforcement broached the subject, that there is an entrapment defense there. So we're gonna see this play out here, where he's still incredibly nervous.
Okay. You got
Making me
100?
nervous.
This is your first time doing this or something?
And she says it, right?
All right, go ahead. Drop your drawers. You want to start off with head?
Thank you. Is that how you do it?
Yeah.
I'm gonna take my shoes off. And
Go ahead. Make yourself comfortable. Let me grab a towel, okay? Take a seat.
see, there you go.
So let me grab a towel. I think that's the signal that they've prearranged. And he says, there you go. See, because I think he knows right now in this moment, I think he knows he's cooked.
So let me ask you this though. So drop your drawers. Is that the sort of the sign? We went from, all right, $100 for something quick to drop your drawers. Is that's kind of like the, I don't know, in contract law, the, offer and acceptance?
So it's actually once the money changes hands, and the money doesn't, the solicitation is, soliciting the other person for sexual activity. So, it is always cleaner from a prosecutor's point of view that the money changes hands, because there's no debate at that point that what they were doing. I don't think that in this particular case, depending on what the chat logs show, and again, all alleged and accused, that a reasonable person wouldn't say, hey, he communicated, they agreed on a price for something quick, he showed up to the hotel, they discussed the price again. I think at that point you would be able to bring a case, now whether a jury would convict, that you solicited prostitution without the money changing hands.
If he had walked in the door, looked at her for whatever reason, gotten a bad vibe, seems like he got a bad vibe anyway, but let's say he got a real bad vibe, turned around and walked out the door. Is he still potentially guilty of something at that point? I know if you're, say the more salacious, you're traveling to see a minor kind of thing, right? You don't do anything. There's no money. Generally, it's changed hands. But by the time you get there, you open the door and you're cooked.
He could, so prosecutors have the discretion to determine or to say and certify when they file an information, which is the charging document, that they believe there is enough evidence to support a criminal charge. And in a case like this, I believe a prosecutor would have good faith to prosecute if, depending on the chat logs, right, what the communications were, and that he showed all the way up. There are a lot of prosecutors out there that would not prosecute that, right? They just say, hey, the transaction never took place. There's a defense of abandonment, right? So, but with solicitation, you're soliciting. You're not actually committing the act. So you kind of get it in a lot of things with the law. There's a gray area, right? There'd be disagreements between attorneys and prosecutors. So could I see a prosecutor charging under those circumstances where he kind of walks in and walks out? Yes. Would all of them? I don't think so. And of course, it's a more complex case for the prosecution under that first set that you proposed, him walking away.
And the sheriff's office may have smoke coming out of their ears if the prosecutor declines to prosecute, right? But at that point, it's out of their hands.
Well, and I think the press conference is indicative of that, right? When they're holding these press conferences, they're saying, prosecute this. So, but yes, I think that if the prosecutor's office decided not to move forward, they'd be like, hey, well, we did all this work. He showed up. Why aren't you doing it? And it would be fair of a prosecutor to say he abandoned it. Did at some point he intend to do it? Yes, but he didn't do it. So,
bro, do you want to like nut on my face or something? Like, chill. I'm just trying to
After Craig is arrested, I leave my location to go over to that hotel to try to get his side of the story. Well, Craig gives me a very cold, mean stare, and it's pretty clear he doesn't want to discuss that night's events.
What happened tonight? I mean, you are a public figure, and yet tonight, it appears that you can't.
Would it ever make sense to talk to someone like Chris Hansen? I've been watching the show for 30 years.
For something quick.
I think every defense attorney that has ever watched Chris Hansen is cringing during these conversations because
there is no good that could come.
No, anything you say is going to be used against you. And a lot of these people, they open up to him. And now, in his case, he's not, and to his credit, because anything he says is going to be used against him. But when they open up to Chris, they're not talking to a police officer. They're talking to a civilian. And so the same protections don't apply. He is under arrest. It's clear, but he's not being interrogated by a law enforcement officer. Now, I think a defense attorney could get creative and try to say that, maybe some of these statements should be suppressed. But the reality is,
do you think law enforcement is aware of that, and perhaps that's a reason that they include Chris Hansen?
I do. I do, especially in the earlier stuff Chris Hansen did, where he sits down with them before they're in custody. I mean, a lot of those early videos that Chris Hansen would do, it still does to this day, the Dateline stuff, they come in, they're engaging with the decoy, right, the undercover, and then he comes out and he says, hey, why don't you have a seat, right? And people, there's this viral stuff. Have a seat, And so at that point, they're not under arrest. They're having a conversation, and everything they say, I made a mistake. That's all admissible, and it's very damning evidence.